not only do we have a clock in our brain that kind of looks at light, but we have one in every single one of our cells.
These are tools to pick up to better your life. And intuitive fasting will just happen as you gain metabolic flexibility.
Shawn, it is everything. I mean, we are a different person at different times of the day. Can you believe that? 80% of our genes have this circadian on and off pattern. So in the morning, you turn on the genes of metabolism and you turn on the genes of thinking, concentrating, all the things that your body knows to do during the day. And at night, 2 to 3 hours before bed, our body knows to turn off those genes, to turn off the metabolism, to turn off the genes of daytime, and to concentrate on repair and renewal, which is equally as important to us, as you know, for aging, longevity, disease, and even energy. You need that counterbalance. But our society, we have flipped this completely upside down. We pay no attention, and all of our society is built on this system of light all the time, eating all the time, and thinking that we need to be doing complicated tasks all the time. So one of the biggest things I discovered is that not only do we have a clock in our brain that kind of looks at light, but we have one in every single one of our cells. We have a clock. The science is brand new. I mean, we've known for thousands of years that we have these circadian rhythms, but the Nobel Prize in Medicine a few years ago went on to researchers looking at circadian biology, because now we're realizing, oh wait, it's not just sleep and wake. It is everything. Everything can be, and I don't want to overstate it. You can't say, oh, just eat junk food, and as long as you watch your circadian clock, that's fine. But I do think it's equally important to time things during the day as it is the quality of your food. So it's that important. Up to 80% of our genes work on a circadian pattern. So you really want to be eating, sleeping, and getting light at the right times of the day.
So this isn't to just restrict yourself and to punish yourself and to get your body to do something that it doesn't want to do. The way that we really evolved, we had times when we were eating, and then we had times where we were not eating. And now today, like you mentioned, with technology, now we have 24/7 access, and we're also not sleeping well. So this is just creating this feedback loop where we're constantly eating.
In fact, somebody said that they wouldn't talk about my book because anything that had the word fasting in it signaled disordered eating. And what I said is, actually what we're doing right now in our society is disordered. So when you eat up to 16 hours a day and you only take a break overnight for 8 hours, that's disordered. For thousands of years, we know we have very good data, historical data, that we are not supposed to be eating late at night, that most cultures stopped eating either at sundown or shortly after sundown because you didn't have that option to have refrigerators, microwaves, drive-throughs, and there was no light. So you pretty much wrapped it up around sunset, and then in the morning probably didn't just like roll out of bed and eat your toast and muffin. You would go out, get some food, and maybe there's a little bit more of a break. And so what I'm talking about is taking a very natural break that we were actually programmed to do and putting that back into our lives.
So that's what circadian fasting is.
Circadian fasting is exactly that. It's taking a break between 12, 13, 14, even up to 16 hours, but doing it in a way that optimizes our biology. So, we see intermittent fasting all the time in our lay culture, and it's almost like you can mean anything by saying intermittent fasting. People eat late at night and then they don't eat all day, and they're eating their meal super late, and they're really kind of doing the wrong timing, in my opinion. If you're doing it for metabolic health, you really do want to match it up with the right timings. If you look at cultures all around the world, there's fasting in every single culture. And it's usually based on the circadian rhythms. There's something called the metabolic switch. So in the New England Journal of Medicine paper about intermittent fasting, they said that Dr. Mattson was the lead author, and he said the magic of intermittent fasting is not just caloric restriction. So of course, if you're like, honestly, if I told you you can't eat late at night, you're probably going to eat less calories overall. So that's going to be beneficial for you. So he said it's more than that. There's also other beneficial things that are happening. It's like exercise. You get benefit from your muscle getting the exercise, but there's all these downstream benefits of exercise. So something called the metabolic switch is something that I talk about as being one of the magics of intermittent fasting. Taking a break between your dinner and your breakfast can help deplete the glucose in your bloodstream. And then it helps deplete the glucose in your liver. And once you start getting low on that glycogen from your liver, you start to activate these pathways. And that metabolic switch going back and forth between using glucose for fuel and using fatty acids for fuel, that's the magic. This metabolic switch is what you need to be turning on. And most Americans never turn on that metabolic switch ever, because you're never getting to the point where you're depleting the glucose that you have overnight.
And so we're going to see uptick in obviously insulin sensitivity, autophagy, BDNF. Everything's going to start working better.
Inflammation, right. Cholesterol, blood pressure, diabetes. So insulin dysregulation improves. And brain health. Yeah. So one of the best things, and gut health. So all the things that we're talking about here, the energy trifecta, gut health, hormone health, and immune health, all improve from doing this kind of circadian style intermittent fasting.
So I just shared this study yesterday, and this was a randomized controlled trial. And it's just looking at what if we just condensed that eating window with the calories staying the same. And this was with diabetic patients. Mm-hmm. One group's eating what I was told to do in my university classes, certification programs, eat 5 to 8 meals a day. But one set of folks were eating 5 to 6 meals a day, and another group ate just 2 bigger meals instead. Mm-hmm. Same amount of calories. At the end of the study, the folks who ate just 2 larger meals a day, same amount of calories, lost more weight, lost more hepatic fat, had a greater improvement in insulin sensitivity, and more. And again, it's not about deprivation. Matter of fact, let's address this. Yeah. How do we get to a place where we're not running around and this is like so hard and we're depriving ourselves? What are we missing when we even have that concept come up that it's too difficult, it's not natural, and we're going to be just having this incessant hunger?
The problem, Shawn, is that we all live in a diet culture, right? Where we are taught about deprivation and reward through foods. You reward yourself with a cheat day and you deprive yourself all week. And so I think that sometimes something like intermittent fasting, the word even triggers people into thinking they're going to be deprived and then that they're going to be hungry because we're so used to diet culture. So I do tell people that if you are triggered by the word or the concept, it's not right for you. You need to fix that first, because this is not talking about a diet or deprivation. This is resetting those ancient biological rhythms to help us get to a place with more energy and more health. We are not talking about a 30-day diet that's going to help you lose weight. So really separating out diet culture from what we're talking about is the key, because if you're doing this right, you're not going to feel deprived. You're going to feel more energetic. Your sleep is going to be better and your long-term health improves. And so this is a lifestyle. It's not a diet.
What considerations, if any, can we talk about with women in regards to circadian fasting? Because that's the kind of like, and I've mentioned I tagged you the other day when somebody was asking like, well, what about with women? Can this be appropriate? And so often studies are done, and it's recently a shift is taking place, not taking women into consideration, and also just looking at women as smaller men.
Yes.
So are there any considerations for women in circadian fasting?
This is such an important point. Circadian fasting and intermittent fasting in general is a term like exercise. So Could you over exercise? Yeah. So same thing, you can over fast. So there are many negative things that can happen from over exercise. You can, injure yourself. Same thing. If you over fast, you can, not everyone, but you could injure your hormones and your metabolism. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't exercise, right? That doesn't mean that you should not fast. What we're talking about, this overnight circadian fast, is something that we were programmed to do. So I'm asking women to parse out for themselves that there is 3-day water fasts, and then there on the other extreme is a circadian fast, which is natural overnight between 12 and 15, 16 hours. You decide, you pick your own adventure, because you don't have to do it every day. You can alternate. So personally, I tell people that I'm very sensitive to those hormonal signals, as many women are. And so I have to alternate the lengths of my circadian fast. So I'll do a very short or no fast one day, and then the next day I'll do kind of a push fast. So maybe it'll be like 14, 15, 16 hours, depending on how I'm doing that day. And then the week before my period, it's called the late luteal phase of your hormonal cycle. It's okay to not go hard on the exercise, not go hard on the fasting. It's okay to do some more self-care, because you're in a phase of your hormonal cycle that is very low on the hormones and the building blocks of energy. So you're insulin resistant, you're stress resistant, or more stress sensitive, I should say. So that means that these are not the times of the month that you should be going hard on the fasting and on the exercise. So listening to your body, but also knowing these tips and tricks to navigate is really, really important. So for women, I say absolutely you should try intermittent fasting. There's anyone who wants to challenge us on that, I will challenge them any day. It's such horrible advice to say, oh, women should not intermittent fast. That's like saying women should not exercise. You're doing a disservice to half the population by saying that, because now you're confusing them. Now they're saying, oh, maybe I should be eating 16 hours a day and I should be eating every 2 hours. Like maybe I was getting it wrong. No, it's very healthy to take a break between your last meal of the day and your first meal the next day. But just take it easy. We have very sensitive hormones in our brain. We have something called GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. It's pulsing all the time. And it's super sensitive to stress. It's also sensitive to light and all these other inputs, but super sensitive to mental stress or to physical stress. So if you are stressing your body out, it will stop pulsing. And you will not get your period that month. You will not be able to be pregnant that month. So that fertility cycle, but also it affects your thyroid and your adrenals. All of it is shut off because your body's feeling a ton of mental stress. So you really, and women, we think evolutionarily and biologically are wired more sensitive to that GnRH pulse. So it can stop at any point. Female athletes deal with this all the time. When they're training too hard without recovery, that GnRH pulse will pause and they will not get their period that month. And a lot of Olympic athletes and professional athletes really do have to work on a lot more of the recovery and making sure that they're not giving their brain that danger stress signal to turn off fertility. And so what I tell people is the same thing with intermittent fasting. If you do it too extreme, too aggressively, too long, you will send signals to your brain that you are in stress mode and it will turn off fertility. But that does not mean you should not do it. Maybe shorten the amount of time. Maybe it's too intense for you. Maybe you need to do it every other day. Maybe shorter intervals. So that's how I would advise women.
The benefits of so-called time-restricted feeding, intermittent fasting, are many. So there is, just to be crystal clear about one thing, because people sometimes get caught up on this idea of, is intermittent fasting the only way to lose weight or maintain weight? And of course the answer is no. A person could eat from morning until night, calorie control, etc., and lose weight or maintain weight. That's clear too. The benefits of intermittent fasting, however, is that for many people, not all people, but for many people, restricting their so-called feeding window, or the time during each 24-hour cycle in which they're ingesting food, to about 8 hours or so, does a number of things that are positive. First of all, it's been shown that people can often adhere to that. They can stick to that much more easily than they can eating smaller portions. I'm one of these people. I can't eat half the croissant. I don't see croissants in halves. I only see croissants in wholes, and usually I see 2 or 3, meaning I can't eat just half the croissant. I'm incapable of doing that. I just have never done it. I don't plan to. But I cannot eat the croissant and then eat the croissant later. Okay, and many people find that that's more accessible to them. Sachin's lab and other labs have shown that even the same total amount of calories limited to a certain period within each 24-hour cycle actually can allow people to lose weight. Now, that's an interesting and kind of controversial statement, but ideally people are eating healthy within that feeding window. So we could talk about what eating healthy might look like. But there's also that when we start to fast, at first it's painful. We don't want to do this. It's that stress and anxiety and friction. We have to override our reflex to reach for food, etc. But it also creates a really beautiful scenario because the dopamine system, this reward system in our brain, is tied to when we actually not just indulge in things, but anticipation. If we know that we are going to start eating at noon, the food that we eat at noon actually tastes much better to us than the food that we didn't have to wait for. And we've all experienced this. If you've ever waited for food or you couldn't eat, and then even trivial food really tastes delicious. It resets, it recalibrates our sense of taste. So we tend to pursue less of these so-called highly palatable foods, or these foods that, highly palatable sounds great, delicious. Highly palatable foods are foods often that have a lot of hidden sugars and other things that can disrupt metabolism. And I know you're familiar with all this. But time-restricted feeding is a beautiful way to create harmony with eating and create harmony within the reward pathways by which, we all need to eat sooner or later. So it's pretty clear that the 8-hour feeding window is a good target. Eating windows that are much shorter, where, some people do the 1 meal per day, only 1 meal per day, or 6-hour feeding windows. A lot of people feel gastric distress because they're eating so much during that short feeding window. Some people might benefit from that, but it does seem like 8 hours or 10 hours is a good thing to shoot for. Although I did learn recently that most people who are shooting for an 8-hour window actually are eating for a 9 or 10-hour window. People don't track this quite as well as they think they do. And then there are additional benefits, which are if you're eating at a pretty consistent time each day, your sleep tends to be better. And the general rules for fasting that I can observe from the literature are that you want to begin your feeding window at least 1 hour after you wake up, maybe longer, but at least 1 hour. And you want to end that feeding window at least 2 hours before you go to sleep. So where you place it will depend. There's some evidence that eating breakfast and lunch and a little bit in the afternoon and then stopping eating around 6 p.m., provided you have protein early in the day, is more beneficial for muscle maintenance and muscle gain in men and women. That's been shown of various ages. There's some evidence that placing the feeding window later, starting to eat around noon and then stopping to eat around 8 or so, is better. That's probably a schedule. The noon to 8 is probably a little more compatible with most people and social schedules, because you can usually just skip breakfast. People will let you skip breakfast, but if you're the person skipping dinner while everyone else eats dinner, at least in our culture, it's not really socially compatible. So I've been doing intermittent fasting for a long time. I'm not super strict about it. I will occasionally have some almonds or something in the morning, but I generally start eating sometime around noon, and I try to stop eating sometime around 8, but it usually ends up being closer to 9. And I think that it's a great way to enhance your sleep. You then have very predictable periods of focus during the day as well. You'll start to notice you have a lot of focus early in the day, or you can predict when your periods of focus will happen. And that can be great for doing work, etc. So I think and I could go on and on. I think there are a lot of blood sugar regulation benefits, etc. But again, if you're eating far more calories than you're burning, then it's going to be impossible to lose weight or maintain weight. But I think for most people, time-restricted feeding is a really great way to go about life. It also makes life less stressful because you don't have to think about food for certain periods of the day, and you know when you're going to be eating. So yeah. Do you do time restricted feeding?
Of course.
Yeah,
So this also makes you more resilient to stress
Right.
and to be able to be aware of that voice in your head.
Yeah.
And, here it is, 1:53 in the afternoon as of this recording. All I've had today was my Four Sigmatic coffee much
impressive.
earlier. And
I confess, I had something this morning after my run, but
so this is the great thing about it too, is like some days I throw in these longer fasting periods whereas most days I'll probably eat around 10 or 11 for myself. But I've been doing this for, I don't even know how long, maybe 9 years.
Oh, that's great.
And
where did you first learn about it? Because Sachin's work goes back to about 2010. And of course, I should acknowledge people have been doing time restricted feeding for centuries. This is not something that was discovered at the Salk Institute, but the science and the benefits, one in particular, the benefits on liver health have been really impressive. That is something that is only recently known. But where did you initially hear about
now
this?
I remember it's 8 years, and it was Ori Hofmeckler.
I'm so glad you mentioned him. Israeli Special Forces guy.
That's
I
right.
know Ori. I'm so glad you mentioned him. He really deserves credit. It's the warrior diet.
That's right. Exactly.
He deserves credit for being one of the first people I ever heard. He said this thing of that you have to eat 6 meals a day or 3 meals a day. He said that's crazy. When he was in Israeli Special Forces, they were eating one time a day. And I think Ori's got to be in, sorry, Ori, if you're younger than this, but he's got to be in his 60s, and he is in amazing shape.
Exactly. That's the thing for me, even when I first picked up the tool, was I'm a very big proponent of results.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like, oh, this guy is at this level in life, and like, just look at him and his cognitive ability, like he's really onto something. Of course, when he's putting these ideas out, they sound very, very sketchy.
Oh,
I
brief Ori Hofmeckler, sir. I wrote to him years ago and said, I think your book is fantastic. I want to come talk to you. So I drove out to his house in Temecula, and we sat there. And he's also an animal lover, which I am too. I'm not a vegan, I confess, but I do love animals. And he had French bulldogs. He had a little pig running around. He had like all these, he had so much stuff going on there. And he told me about this compound called berberine, which is a tree bark that can lower blood glucose. Now, I don't take berberine personally. It's just it's not for me. But nowadays, there's all this talk about metformin for lowering blood glucose. Berberine and metformin are basically identical in function. And he was telling me, there's this tree bark berberine. And I thought, this is pretty weird. Basically, everything he told me that day, time-restricted feeding, berberine. He was also talking about cold water exposure. He was talking about a number of other things related to high-intensity training. Everything he told me that day is now showing up in the hardcore scientific literature and is all over social media. So Ori, if there were a prize that one could give for this sort of thing, he would definitely deserve it.
In my opinion, and I try to prove it, the best intermittent fasting should be based on 1 meal a day. Quite honestly, I try to also prove that we should eat at night. That means supper was always the main meal of human. I'm not Christian, but even Jesus has his last supper. He didn't have his last breakfast because breakfast did not even exist at that time. In the Bible, it's called Pat Shacharit. That means very little stuff that humans used to eat. If you look at King David when he was a kid and before he just fought Goliath, so his dad, Ishai, sent him with some food to his brother who was supposed to be soldiers with King Saul in the valley of Ayalon, about to fight the Philistine, where Goliath the giant was there threatening everybody. It took David a whole day. He came from the Judea area. It took him a whole day to reach Ayalon, I guess by foot, which is normal because people do not need to eat breakfast. He brought them food toward the end. People don't think about it, but it repeatedly appears since biblical time. The Romans warrior used to eat only at night. In fact, Julius Caesar had centurion, police almost, that forbidden people to enjoy meals during the day. And the Greeks used to do same thing. So the concept of intermittent fasting, of minimizing eating during the day, and eating 1 meal a day, it's not just nice concept of health. It has been used by people who were extremely physically engaged, from the Spartan to the Greeks to the Roman warrior. I felt this myself many years ago that my performance and cognitive function increase dramatically when I don't eat. Later on, when I studied in university, I realized the amazing science behind under eating and fasting, how it actually increases your alertness, put you in a survival mode, which is exactly what you need. Improve energy utilization, which is exactly what you need. But right now we know, with the science of stress, that not eating turn on the stress response system to improve you. We, I believe, though, should not overdo it. So in my opinion, I believe that people should eat once a day and don't fast and eat every other day. The reason so? Two reasons. Number one, we evolved to do it this way. We live around the 24-hour circadian clock. We need to compensate at least once a day before suffering side effects. But even more so, when you prolong any stress, whether it's physical or nutritional, you are putting yourself under the risk of falling to chronic stress. And chronic stress is the worst thing you can put yourself under, Shawn. So extending fasting to every other day as a routine, or every 3 days, like fasting 3 days as a routine, I believe it's a big mistake. It goes too long, it creates emotional stress. We never evolve for that, and it doesn't bring you any benefit beyond what I just described. I clearly say in my book and show that every stress to be beneficial must be intermittent. You cannot just prolong any stress. Just think about even the radio that you like. Put you under stress. It's a creative stress. It's great. Put you adrenaline. You create and you achieve. But what if somebody just put you now for a week like this, standing like this next to the mic and drilling? That will crush you, Shawn. Same beneficial stress, prolongated. It has to do simply with the way we evolve. Our endocrine system, the brain. Control. The most important response to stress that we have, it's called the fight or flight response. It's the most critical response to primal survival. Because if some kind of a danger happen or a beast is about to kill you, even more so, a human being is threatening you, or war, or some situation of fire that you need to fight or run away, this system help you react properly. Problem: this system never evolved to be activated for a prolonged period of time. It evolved to be strong, fast, swift reaction. So when you see fighters in the ring, correctly so, they're usually coming in a bout that divided to a 3 up to 5 minute round. 5 minutes on maybe UFC or MMA, and 3 minutes in boxing. Give you enough time to somehow do these intermittent bouts that you are dealing with. In fact, coffee is totally complementary, and so is MCT. Totally complementary to fasting. In fact, it makes fasting even work better. There's a lot of science. How, in fact, coffee mimic the effect of fasting. There are certain kind of nutrients that mimic the effect of fasting and exercise on your body. There's nothing wrong with eating this nutrient. Shawn, I mean, people don't understand when you have this stress-activated nutrient, some of them fell under the radar, some of the most important. Most people hardly ever, but many of them still exist in our food. So listen to that. How about you eat blueberries? They taste sweet. They give you naturally occurring sugar, right? But this does not raise your blood sugar. The postprandial effect of blueberry or even green tea or coffee is reduction of blood sugar. In fact, if you eat something with blueberries, enough polyphenol or tannin in blueberry will reduce the blood sugar. And say in all berries, strawberries, raspberries. There's research done on grape pomace. If you eat grapes, not the industrial or GMO without seed. With the seeds and the pulp, the grape pomace have shown to significantly reduce postprandial after meal blood sugar and lipids. Now, Shawn, you know that this is the number one factor for diabetes, obesity, and aging, is the postprandial elevation of blood sugar and blood lipid. So, for people who eat frequently, every time they finish or after the meal, breakfast, lunch, a power snack, and then dinner, and then late dinner, there is elevation of blood sugar and lipid that overall it's an accumulated factor that lead to metabolic syndrome, obesity, and diabetes. This explains why modern men are so vulnerable. So the point is, what we generally don't know, that many nutrients that are hidden someplace, even on the supermarket, don't work like the regular food that we eat. You can eat it when you undereat during the day. It complements fasting, and that's why I put berries as a very desirable food. Good grass-fed whey contain nutrients that mimic fasting, and basically some kind of fruits have it. You minimize your eating, but you don't need to starve yourself. You actually complement your body by giving nutrients that and strengthen your insulin, prevent high blood sugar spike, make you lean down even more so. So your routine, actually, when it's reaching the breakfast, it's just perfect. Not only that you fast, you put coffee that mimic fasting. Coffee does other things too. Shut down your hunger a little bit, activate cellular factors that improve your brain capacity and your protective capacity. And then you exercise, as you described, you further deplete. That's stress principle number 2, maximus impact. You deplete further your glycogen because you virtually exercise on empty. So by the time you finish exercise, you're in a peak energy depletion. Your body is in a peak survival mode. If you can pull this, and it's not easy, instead of shoving food recovery immediately, pull that, push that for another hour or two, you just got great beneficial factor percolating in your system. So then when you eat the meal, you cannot get fat after such depletion. That's part of the stress principle. Energy depletion overrules any other factor. In fact, you become even resilient to sugar itself, and sugar is the worst thing you can do. But when your glycogen is depleted, your body can tolerate even sugar. So I believe your intermittent fasting is right because it works for you, because you feel it, you experience. There is no steady rule, but the one thing you should avoid, and I'm saying it to everybody, do not go under a theory if it doesn't work. Don't put yourself on a stress that will crush you. Do not overfast, do not overtrain, and every time that you are under enormous stress or anything, stop and try to break it down. If you feel that something is prolonged, try to break it down either by a bout of exercise, go out, breathe air, talk to somebody that you trust. Don't let anything manifest or percolate inside you for too long.
Many people are finding themselves in a lack of metabolic flexibility. They're stuck in that sugar burning mode. They're bound by the next meal. Like the amount of bandwidth that the next meal and the next snack and the next craving it's taking up a lot of their headspace up throughout the day. And even when they eat food, they don't really feel fulfilled for long, and they can feel fatigued and lethargic afterwards. These are some of the hallmarks of metabolic rigidity or metabolic inflexibility. We all are born as babies producing ketones for proper neural development. It's something that humans would have been in times of ketosis for eons. So when people talk about this stuff being a fad, I mean, what we're doing right now in modern life is the fad. We're just returning something that people talked about for thousands of years. And it's now substantiated in science too. So it's our birthright. We're metabolic flexibility is our birthright. We're just returning to that birthright. That's all. And that, to me, when someone has metabolic flexibility, they have a log on the fire, fat for fuel, they have the kindling on the fire when they want it and when they need it. That's the best light. That's the best energy to fuel your day. There's no shame in either one of those. The problem is people feel like I'm advocating for people to always be in ketosis or to always be fasting. No, these are tools to pick up to better your life. And intuitive fasting will just happen as you gain metabolic flexibility, because you can go longer without eating. And like one day I'll wake up, I feel great. I know I feel great when I do some fasting and time restricted feeding. I'm consulting patients in the morning online, and I'll break my fast at lunch. And then the next day, maybe it's a Saturday morning, I want to have a breakfast. There should be that grace and lightness to this. It shouldn't be this punitive thing. And that's what I'm talking about. That's what you talk about. This is our message when it comes to this. This is a tool to better your life. We're not like, you can't eat, and if you eat, you're bad. I mean, this is completely a misrepresentation of our message. So metabolic flexibility is this awesome place where you have food peace. You have like an inner stillness of knowing, I feel great, and I eat when I want, and I don't eat when I don't want, because I feel great where I'm at. And there's just this in-tuned awareness of what your body needs at any given moment.
Yeah. And this, when you talk about utilizing different fuels, this is literally, the heart of this is the mitochondria.
Oh, yes.
And being able to utilize the different fuels.
Absolutely. Yeah. So mitochondrial indecision. Many people find themselves, I call it in the book, and that's how I've been calling it for years, is metabolic purgatory, where you're kind of not fully fat adapted, you're not fully sugar adapted, you got the kindling off the fire because you're trying to diet, and you're like, that's diet culture. That's like the toxic diet culture of failing and filling yourself with shame because you can't stick with it. Yeah, because you were dependent on kindling. So mitochondrial, we need to train our mitochondria over time to build the proper infrastructure to start burning fat for fuel. That takes time. So the analogy that I use in the book is this sort of proverbial yoga class for your metabolism. Look, I don't do yoga that much, so I'm just giving myself as an example, and I'm not very flexible either. So if I showed up to yoga, even if it's a beginner class, I'm going to be like, what the heck? The human body should not move like this. I'm horrible about it. And I could even judge yoga and say, yoga is not for me. But no, it's something new. And I'm musculoskeletally, I am inflexible. Many people's metabolism is inflexible. So it's just about being consistent and gaining that flexibility. And part of that is the mitochondrial ability to burn fat for fuel.
Oh, wow. So we want to get our mitochondria to be able to do downward dog.
Yeah.
Basically.
Hold that warrior too.
Hold that warrior. I love that so much, because essentially what happens we create these kind of metabolic clogs with the way that we eat, especially the type of food that we're eating. As you mentioned a couple of times, just the very nature of the things that we are exposing ourselves to, that's the fad. Smurf cereal that I grew up on, which was my favorite, that's a fad, Even though it looks like Doritos have been around a long time, it's a fad. These are new things, but creating these metabolic blocks where your mitochondria don't really even know how to utilize different fuels, and creating that stagnation that you were just mentioning.
100%. But it's an aha moment for people once they're on the other side of it. It makes complete sense. But I get it when what we're talking about here is turning everything on its head as far as what they knew. And they don't even, just because something's there every day, they think that's normal. And many people settle for just feeling lousy, different degrees of lousy. And like you said, it's like that maybe something's working for them now, and that's the only truth for them. But the reality is not everybody's wellness path has to look exactly the same. This is the tool to improve your quality of life.
Talk about, and I think this is so important, just to bring some more practicality to things too. Some of the specific benefits of intuitive fasting. And you go through 5 of them in the book. I want to talk about a couple of them.
Yeah.
The first one being ketosis.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So that's part of the log on the fire, right? I mean, that is this what's known in the research as the fourth macronutrient. So we have protein, fats, carbs, and ketone bodies that, again, babies are all producing them when they're born. We can all produce them. They are naturally produced in the body. And so endogenous ketone bodies is something that's one of the hallmark benefits of intermittent fasting and a clean ketogenic diet, which mimics fasting in many ways. And if you look at the research, obviously you look at the research, but for people that are curious about this, is that if you look at the pathways of the ketogenic diet and fasting, you'll see a lot of the same things because beta-hydroxybutyrate is at the heart of a lot of that research. So it's not just a way to burn fat, it's a way to fuel your body. And it's not just a way to burn fat, it's an epigenetic modulator. It's a signaling molecule to actually downregulate and basically manage really cool pathways in the body. So it downregulates these pro-inflammatory pathways like we just were talking about, this chronic inflammatory state. Well, this is a natural, completely free way to lower inflammation levels. So things like NF-kappa B, the NLRP3 inflammasome, these pro-inflammatory pathways are lowered naturally in this state. And we can upregulate these pro-antioxidant, anti-inflammatory pathways like NRF2 pathway, the AMPK pathway. So it's a regulator of inflammation. And it increases mitochondrial biogenesis. We were talking mitochondria, actually making more resilient mitochondria. It increases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, actually encouraging neuroplasticity and making new neurons. I mean, I keep thinking of Paracelsus, the physician within. I'm like, that dude was right. He was right.
Wow.
He didn't know all this stuff we know now. It was a physician within. And autophagy with cellular recycling, that's just ketosis. So that was one of the 5 in that chapter.
That's so powerful. And I love that you said this multiple times, the physician within creating, we've got the most powerful pharmacy in our body, and all of these different things that, man, you cannot get a pill for. Your body just does when you allow it to. So empowering, man.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, which this is the thing about your book, is that you really spend time outlining the plan to get people to the place of intuitive fasting, intuitive eating, which again, would sound like a very, not a conventional term. We'll just put it like that. But that's really ultimately where we want to get, where we can actually listen to our body, listen to the physician within. Because what we're eating, the way that we're eating, oftentimes we're programmed to eat like somebody else, to eat for what somebody else's needs are. But once we really dial that in and listen to our own bodies, that's when the magic happens. So can you talk a little bit about the plan that you've outlined in the book?
Yeah, man, thanks for touching on that. Because I think it is a paradox on one end of it, intuitive fasting. When someone's in sugar burning, hangry mode, addicted to food, fasting will not be intuitive. I agree with that. But what I'm saying is, just like that yoga class, you're not flexible. You need to become flexible so you can have strength and resilience and flexibility and intuition. So I'm right there with you. It's not intuitive to you. But by using these tools, you can gain metabolic flexibility, which, just like with yoga, you'll gain strength, you'll gain resilience, you'll gain a rootedness in your body. You will be able to, because that fat is, the log is on the fire, you are keto adapted or fat adapted, you can go longer without eating. So it is this yoga class where we're stretching and contracting the metabolism over 4 weeks. And you and I both know this, but it's not done after 4 weeks. I want you to cycle through these 4 weeks as many times as you need to, because this is a template to gain metabolic flexibility. So week 1 is a 12-12 fasting to eating window. These are all types of TRFs, time restricted feeding windows. So they're very moderate, approachable, accessible forms of fasting light in a way. We're not talking about multiple day water fast or dry fast. They have their place with doctor supervision and for when it's clinically appropriate. But this is something that you don't need a doctor for necessarily. Most people can do this by themselves. So 12-12 is, I think, so underappreciated, right? You know what I mean? It's like the fasting, the fasting, militant fasting people will be like, that's weak. That's weak. Like, why are you even saying that? But they have to understand most people are not where they're at. Like, we have to lean these people in and help them out where they're at and be there for them in the way that they need at this point. So 12-12, I think most people just can start there.
And the data shows that just after 12 hours, 12 hours, you start getting a lot of these benefits start happening.
Yes.
So, it's definitely touching that, which is 12-12 is what specifically?
So you have 24 hours in the day. If they've learned nothing in this conversation, that's the first thing they'll learn. 24 hours a day. 12-12 is you have a 12 hour of eating, 12 hours of fasting. So 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Have it work with your schedule. The goal of it mainly is to not eat too late at night and allow 12 hours to your body to
includes your
fast,
sleep time.
which includes sleep. People I think get confused on that all the time. But yeah, absolutely. Sleep is part of that.
First and foremost, smart intermittent fasting improves metabolic function. One of the most incredible things about smart intermittent fasting is that it initiates hormonal changes that make stored body fat more accessible. Data published in the peer-reviewed journal Obesity states that employing intermittent fasting is like flipping a, quote, metabolic switch that shifts the metabolism from fat creation and fat storage to mobilization of body fat in the form of free fatty acids and fatty acid derived ketones to be used for fuel. So this process is enabling our body to actually access the reserves that most of us here in the United States, we've got about 242 million of our citizens are overweight or obese, that we're carrying around a lot of reserves already, and we're constantly bringing food in. Our bodies don't get a chance to go and use those reserves and break that down. And we talked about this with Dr. Sylvia Tara on a classic episode of the Model Health Show, really looking at the science of fat and digging in on that subject as well. Now, if we understand this, that we're able to now access our stored body fat more easily, this highlights another study here. This was conducted by researchers at the University of Copenhagen, and it found that intermittent fasting is able to quickly reduce insulin resistance and nullify the effects of insulin-created roadblocks that stop fat from being released from the fat cells. And their study also revealed that intermittent fasting has some significant effects on our vital satiety hormones. So again, this shouldn't be hard for us because it's just getting in touch with what our genes are expected to do, what we've been doing for centuries upon centuries upon centuries as human beings. And so it has a lot to do with our satiety hormones and us feeling good even when we're not eating. Research published in the journal Endocrinology reports that intermittent fasting can improve the function of satiety-related hormones like neuropeptide Y, while supporting fat loss and retaining lean muscle mass. This is the big one. Because a startling percentage of people who lose weight through conventional calorie restriction regain their lost fat and find it exceedingly harder to lose weight over time. And a huge metabolic player in this conundrum is the loss of their body's valuable lean muscle mass. So to say lean and muscle mass is kind of a repeat, because muscle mass in and of itself is lean tissue. But we've got to understand that when we lose muscle mass, muscle is very expensive for our bodies to carry. And it really is this kind of metabolic machinery that we carry around. And muscle is also a reservoir for very potent hormones that help to regulate our metabolism. And the list goes on and on and on the benefits of having more muscle in our frame. But the more muscle we're carrying, the more caloric expenditure that we have automatically. Our resting metabolic rate is going to be higher for this version of ourself that has a significant amount of muscle mass versus a version of ourself that has, 20% less, 25% less muscle mass. We're going to be just burning more calories at rest and when we're doing stuff, all right? But multiple studies now are really affirming this and sharing this data that haphazardly cutting calories, this caloric restriction paradigm that we have, and not understanding the quality of food, circadian rhythms, and all these other aspects, sleep and how our sleep affects our metabolism, just haphazardly cutting calories, we're losing a significant amount of our muscle mass when we do that haphazardly. But a way that we are able to retain our body's muscle mass is through circadian nutrition, circadian fasting. All right, so improving our metabolism overall, improving fat loss, but also retaining our lean muscle. That's the key. And this is why folks find it so difficult to keep weight off after crash diets, is that we're losing muscle, which sets us in a disadvantage, a metabolic disadvantage. All right, so we want to retain our muscle mass. And we know that this circadian fasting, smart intermittent fasting, is one way that is clinically proven to do that. But also during that fasting window, we'll just say again, the researchers had folks go from 15 sporadic hours a day of eating just to 12, for example. So that's just maybe you finish your last meal of the day at, say, 7:30 p.m. And then you have your first nutritional intake, your first meal at 7:30 a.m. That's 12 hours. That's not even that big of a deal if you think about it, because our fasting window also includes our sleep. All right. And there's a growing amount of data now also demonstrating how eating late into the evening, because this is one of the things that, again, seems a little bit like fitness and nutrition gossip, but eating late in the evening is going to prevent weight loss or significant weight loss. It's not always 100% the case, for sure. There's nuance here. But in general, what's happening is eating late into the evening creates some significant disruptions to our sleep quality, all right, sleep efficiency, which our sleep is a major controller of our metabolism, all right? And if we're already in a state where we're overweight or obese, when we eat a meal, we're getting a significantly higher increase in cortisol levels, all right? Because there's a little bit of a stress associated with eating food, because your body has to be top line. Your immune system is primarily located in your gut. About 70% of our immune system is located in our gut. And so they have to be front line, interacting and working on is what just came into to our body safe. What do we do to get everything where it needs to be? It can be a stressful event, but it can also be beautiful when things are in balance. So we know that there's a higher propensity towards higher cortisol levels when we eat, if we're overweight or obese. And then that just kind of creates a vicious circle, because cortisol is sort of an antithesis of melatonin. If our cortisol levels are getting pushed up, it's going to push melatonin down. And inherently, that's just one way it's going to affect our sleep quality. And plus, just by the nature of eating a meal, a lot of energy has to go there into digestion. It's a very energy intensive process of taking food, because this is a really powerful like aha moment. When you eat something, it's going to become you. It's going to become human tissue, right? It is a very complex, amazing process. We don't even fully understand yet, but we know that it's the biggest energy demand for the average person is to digest that food that they've eaten. All right. So it's taking energy away from rest and recovery from our sleep. So having a little bit of some barometers there with not eating too late into the evening. It doesn't have to be 100% of the time either. That's the other part. So it's giving us some flexibility and some freedom and not being neurotic about it, but at the same time, what is going to be best for us overall. All right. So, but in addition to that, during that fasting window, that doesn't mean you can't have anything. There's an entire section that I have in Eat Smarter talking about some of the fasting mimicking nutrients in foods that actually help the benefits and encourage even more benefits through specific foods and nutrients consumed during your fasting window. And one of them is an effective adjunct to intermittent fasting, because it's particularly able to support fat loss while protecting muscle mass, as documented in a recent study featured in Clinical Interventions in Aging. And what I'm talking about is the absolutely prized and storied tea, fermented tea, pu'er. All right, pu'er, P-U apostrophe E-R. All right, so pu'er. A recent study published in the peer-reviewed journal Nature Communications uncovered that a unique compound called theobromine found in traditionally fermented pu'er has some remarkable effects on our microbiome as well. So not just being protective of our muscle mass, but also improving the health of our microbiome, which again, our microbes have these internal clocks too, okay? It's not just our human cells, but we have these biological clocks, these circadian clocks within our bacteria cells as well. The researchers found that theobromine in pu'er positively alters gut microbiota that directly reduces excessive liver fat and reduces lipogenesis, the creation of new fat. All right, so, but always, as always, the sourcing of where we're getting these incredible superfoods and super herbs, these incredible teas, matters more than ever. You want to make sure that you're getting it from the right place, because today, the supplement industry, the food industry is so, the regulations, the supply chains, we've talked about this multiple times on the show with some of the leading experts in it. It's a bit sketchy, So we want to work with companies that have integrity, that are sourcing things the right way, that go the extra mile to make sure that you're getting high quality foods and supplements without any nefarious things that come along with it. Because liver damage from haphazard supplement use is one of the things that's on the rise. And this is why the fermented pu'er that I drink is from Peak Teas, Pique, because they use a patented cold extraction technology to actually extract all these bioactive compounds in the pu'er. And also, they have a triple toxin screening process for one of the highest levels of purity, testing for pesticides, heavy metals, toxic molds that are common in tea. All right, it's common. They're making sure that this stuff is not in there. And also, it's wild harvested, so it has even more concentrations of polyphenols that create all these great benefits that we're talking about with the microbiome. All right, definitely check them out. One of my favorite things. Go to peaktea.com/model. That's PIQUETEA.com/model and use the code model at checkout and you get an exclusive 10% off. Okay, that's peaktea.com/model. Use the code model at checkout for 10% off. And I love their pu'er. Also, their ginger tea is one of my favorites. And with the pu'er, I like a little bit of emulsified MCT oil along with that. It's one of my favorite things. Just love it, love it, love it. All right, now when talking about smart intermittent fasting, it's not just in the metabolic domain. It's also in the health of our brain and cognitive function as well. Intermittent fasting, smart intermittent fasting, can stimulate the production of new brain cells. And this is according to data published in the Journal of Molecular Neuroscience. Not only does intermittent fasting stimulate the creation of new brain cells, it also makes the neurons that we already have work better. And numerous studies have revealed that intermittent fasting increases our levels of something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which BDNF is a powerful assistive force in the healthy development and survival of our brain cells. All right, we don't get that many. We know that we do have neurogenesis processes today. And primarily, this is seen in the hippocampus, the memory center of the brain, but many different areas of the brain, we are not just on a whim creating new brain cells. We really need to take care of the brain cells that we have. And so this is another way that intermittent fasting is found to increase the production and release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor to help to protect the survival of our brain cells. It's also been shown to improve neuroplasticity, enhance cognitive function, and protect our brains from a myriad of diseases. All right, so again, we talk even more about this in Eat Smarter, and it's a critical part of our overall health and performance is understanding these things, that anything that's going to be good for our metabolism is also very likely going to be good for our cognitive performance, very likely going to be helpful in slowing down the aging process, helping to prevent diseases, and so much more. So let's talk a little bit about that as well, because one of the most amazing benefits of smart intermittent fasting is the impact that it has on inflammation, for example. And we just did a masterclass episode really breaking down how inflammation works and the mechanisms that the offshoots of those mechanisms. So number one, how does inflammation work? What is it? The impacts that it's having downstream, and actually how can we address reducing inflammation? Well, smart intermittent fasting is one of the ways that we can directly reduce inflammation. A study published in the journal Annals of Nutrition and Metabolism showed that a daily 12-hour intermittent fast was enough to significantly reduce levels of homocysteine and C-reactive protein, which are both major markers of heart disease and systemic inflammation. And in addition, researchers at the Department of Immunology and Microbial Science at the Scripps Research Institute found that intermittent fasting has a profound effect on autophagy throughout our entire body. Also, of course, including our brain. This cellular cleansing is triggered by intermittent fasting, and it's accelerating the removal of metabolic waste products, enabling our cells, tissues, and organs to work more efficiently. And also, smart intermittent fasting has been found to consistently boost the production of human growth hormone. All right, so again, the release of human growth hormone is on that circadian timing system. So having that window of smart intermittent fasting increases the production and release of HGH, or human growth hormone. Intermittent fasting can increase blood levels of human growth hormone by as much as 5-fold. And this is according to scientists at the University of Virginia Medical School. All right, so much powerful information to behold here, and the benefits that we see just by getting in alignment with circadian nutrition, circadian fasting, and allowing our bodies to engage in autophagy and cleaning out metabolic waste and just making room for new growth and development. All right, so this is what our genes expect from us.
Well, actually, we know there's a number of mechanisms by which fasting works, and one of them certainly is weight loss. I mean, anything you do that facilitates healthful weight loss may be potentially beneficial, and obviously nothing works better than fasting. I mean, if you fast, you lose an average of a pound a day. So people do on fast lose a lot of weight. That's certainly at least part of the beneficial effect. There's also a natriuretic effect that occurs where the body selectively eliminates sodium and flushes it out. And most people are eating these high salt diets that allow them to hold lots of extra fluid in order to protect yourself from that toxic effect of excess sodium. And so that excess fluid volume increases your blood pressure. And so when you natriuresis or diurese, what happens is the body gets rid of the excess fluid, the blood volume goes down, the blood pressure starts to drop, the non-healing wounds start to heal, the congestive heart failure starts to reverse. And we also see primary detoxification in fasting. That was kind of the traditional justification for fasting. This idea that the body had toxins in it. And in fact, we know now if you take a fat biopsy of just about anybody in society, you'll find hundreds of different chemicals. Dioxin, PCB, pesticide residues, heavy metals, all kinds of exogenous toxins. There's also endogenous materials, not necessarily toxins, but things like cholesterol and lipofusion and creoid and all kinds of things that are maybe normal products, but when they're in abnormal quantity, they may interfere with cellular function. And the body in fasting rapidly mobilizes and eliminates these toxins. In fact, some people argue does it so rapidly it might be dangerous unless you take their proprietary products. Then, of course, I guess it's perfectly safe. There's also the idea that fasting, much like exercise, induces enzymatic changes. When a competitive athlete works out every day, they get better and better at mobilizing glycogen and their glycogen stores and storing more glycogen. And so that glycogenolysis process is driven by enzymes. And so when you exercise and you force glycogenolysis, you get better at it. You canalize these pathways. Well, fasting does the same thing. When you go on a fast, you canalize glycogen mobilization. And after 48 hours, you've used up your glycogen. Then you canalize lipolysis, fat mobilizing enzyme pathways, and gluconeogenesis, protein mobilizing pathways. And when you induce these pathways, it turns out that persists. So it's not just while you're fasting that you detoxify and mobilize macronutrients more efficiently, but even after fasting, those enzyme pathways persist, much like exercise and athletics, those enzyme systems persist. And so you're inducing macronutrient mobilizing enzyme pathways, which are also mobilizing detoxifying pathways. And so that process of detoxifying gets more and more efficient, maybe a little bit with intermittent fasting and certainly a whole lot with long-term fasting. And so the idea is that the body not just gets rid of the fat, but also a lot of the materials that are stored in that fat, lowering the total body load. We also see problems with gut leakage in people where the intestinal mucosa, fine filter membranes, can become inflamed when exposed to free radicals and leak materials that in genetically vulnerable people stimulates the immune system to attack those particles, but also their own tissues. I mean, that's what autoimmune disease is, where your immune system is attacking your own body. So ulcerative colitis, where your immune system is actually responsible for the inflammation in your colon. And one of the theories is that gut leakage, the constant exposure to these aberrant proteins or bacteria, etc., can lead to this autoimmune response. Well, fasting allows the inflammatory process to profoundly reduce. We know that because if you look at acute phase reactive proteins or other measures of inflammation in the body, it progressively comes down in fasting. We're showing that in the research that we're doing right now. And we see it clinically because these issues heal up. The joint pain goes down. You're getting them off the prednisone, off the methotrexate, out of pain. And then if you feed a whole plant food SOS-free diet, you can actually sustain those results. And so we know that this process of healing the gut leakage appears in fasting. Some of the metabolic products that show up that are aberrant in the urine go away after fasting, which is a sign that micro mesh membrane, the intestinal mucosa, is actually healing. And of course, you got to get rid of the free radicals that cause it to get. That's why you can't drink, because drinking alcohol bathes the body in free radicals. That's why you get cirrhosis of the liver, which is essentially scar tissue, including from wine, even if it's organic. Alcohol itself is a nasty, toxic substance that, from our viewpoint, needs to be eliminated. Same thing with heated fats, particularly heated animal fats at high temperature. Lots of free radicals. The best example is actually smoking. You know, think about people that smoke. They get smoker's face. They get that premature aging. That's wrinkles are cross-linked collagen tissues that come from the free radicals from bathing the body with smoking. So you first get rid of the free radicals, but then you've got to heal up the gut. And one way to heal up the gut is to do, well, nothing. Fasting. It does it on its own. It does it automatically, and it does it more efficiently, we found, than it does with the pills, potions, and powders and all this stuff that everybody's trying to sell everybody. This is a very ancient practice that gives the body a chance to very rapidly both detoxify, normalize some of these factors. There's even, think about psycho-spiritual issues. Almost every religion, the Jews, the Jains, the Hindus, the Muslims, the Christians, everybody, they might kill each other in the street over disagreements, but they have one thing they all agree on, and that's that fasting is a very important process, both for mental and psychological and spiritual purposes. Fasting changes the way people feel about themselves and the world around them. It happens automatically. You can't help it. And so that may be why all these major religions have respect for fasting. And all we've done is take this ancient practice and begin to investigate it scientifically to understand how it is it has such a profound effect on people. Fasting stimulates the immune systems, a process called autophagy. And in fact, in 2016, the Nobel Prize for Medicine was given to a gentleman from Japan that did some fabulous research showing how autophagy is how the body kills cancer cells and reverses these toxicity issues. And fasting accentuates this process of autophagy. And I think one of the biggest things with fasting that we've identified is changes in taste adaptation. We did a study where we detected minimum threshold to salt, to sugar, and we showed that after fasting, the actual taste perceptions change in people to where the foods they used to crave, aren't even that appealing anymore. It's too salty, it's too sweet. They don't need that artificial stimulation that comes from the chemicals that we're adding to food. And the hedonic response, the liking of various types of food changes with fasting. So now people will like the taste of fresh fruit and vegetables that maybe they didn't like before, but now post-fasting they find actually they're very enjoyable. The same process happens over time with careful feeding. If you eat well for a month, you neuroadapt to a low-salt diet. But to get people to eat well for a month is hard when the food is tasteless, disgusting, swill to them because they're addicted to the pleasure trap. So helping escape the pleasure trap may be one of the most powerful tools of fasting because it gives the body a chance to, it's like taking a computer that's got a corrupted hard drive and you reboot it, and now all of a sudden, you don't know why, but it works well. It's working again. And we find the same thing is true with fasting, and we're trying to figure out the why with the research we're doing at True North Health. Fasting is when you have labile reserves that you still have that you can mobilize. Starvation is the moment you've depleted your labile reserves and you begin to break down vital tissues. Now, fasting results in improved health. Starvation results in death. So we don't do starvation at True North Health Center because obviously it would damage our outcome data tremendously. We were really proud of our safety data. We've had 20,000 people walk in and 20,000 people walk out, and we're trying to keep it that way. And the way you do that is avoiding starvation. And the way we do that is we establish baselines, monitor people twice a day. Lots of signs and symptoms that we can monitor to measure that, from electrolyte levels to even looking at basic things like BMI. So the average 70 kilogram male, though, just a healthy male, has enough reserves in their body to fast about 70 days. So we're not even getting close to starvation in our patient population. Now, a very, very thin person wouldn't necessarily be able to fast 40 days. They may not have the reserves to be able to safely do that. Also, I might mention that weight loss in fasting is very rapid at first and in overweight patients, but in thinner people, weight loss is much slower. The body's conservation mechanisms kick in. And so weight loss can be as little as 2 pounds a week, deep into the fast. So it's different than early in fasting where people are diuresing and losing fluid and all that. Now, one thing I want to point out, though, is we are the first place I know that has done this, but we have a DEXA scanner with the new software that does whole body composition. And so we've actually been able to go through and do a study where we are able to show exactly what happens to the fat, the protein, and specifically visceral fat during water-only fasting. And what we found is that not only is fat preferentially mobilized during fasting and protein conserved if you're resting, but that visceral fat is preferentially mobilized. So you might lose 20%, a person might lose 20% of their adipose tissue, but they may lose 50% of their visceral fat, and only a small percentage of their lean tissue. And then after fasting, so what happens in fasting is you lose a bunch of weight. After fasting, you regain weight. But the weight you regain after fasting is water, fiber, glycogen, and protein, not fat. The fat keeps going down. And so what happens is you've lost a bunch of fat, you keep losing fat, but you regain your muscle, your fluid, your fiber, and your glycogen. And it used to be they thought, well, you lose weight, you gain it back, not a good thing. Now we know if rest is introduced in fasting, it minimizes protein mobilization and minimizes gluconeogenesis. If you're too active when you're fasting, what you end up doing is burning protein. And that's why we insist on a restful state. Now, we let them stretch and do yoga and avoid the pathology of bed rest, but that's not a time to be trying to maximize weight loss. You're trying to maximize fat loss. And so the mistake a lot of people do on their own when they're trying to do weight loss regimes is they're doing vigorous exercise in conjunction with fasting. And yeah, they're losing weight, but they're also depleting protein stores unnecessarily. And so that's a really important issue. And we have a paper coming out. People that are interested in that, we have a fasting website called fasting.org, which is a fasting compendium website where it brings the world's literature on fasting together. And they can go on there, and as the papers are published, we release it onto that site. And they'll be able to see this, but it's really exciting because we've got really exciting, and we've also got follow-up data now because we've taken these people before, during, and after fasting, and then during refeeding, but then we've flown them back at 6 weeks and be able to show not only did they lose fat and continue to lose fat, but they can sustain that in a free living environment. And that's been a big criticism. Well, yeah, they can do it at True North Health Center where everything is done for them. But what happens when they go back to the real world? And we're able to show that people are able to sustain this, particularly appropriately motivated people. And the best motivation for people, I find, is pain, debility, and fear of death. So people that are sick are usually willing to do dangerous and radical things like eat well and exercise and go to bed on time. And also really health conscious people that are, being smart about it, trying to do health promotion, they also do really well. For the people that are looking for magic, this isn't so good. If they want to just keep indulging in short-term pleasure-seeking, self-indulgent behavior, they don't want to exercise, they don't want to get enough rest, this isn't for them. This is for highly motivated people that really, above all else, want to avoid the last 20 years of debility that will face most people because they don't live healthfully during their younger years.
But what's much more important is not what you're sort of eating. It's sort of what you're not eating, right? It's not that you need to eat more to prevent cancer. You need to eat less. And certain things are worse for you than others. Eating less sugar is a big one. Eating less refined food, eating less refined grains, because those are the foods. And we know this for sure. If you eat refined grains like muffins, which is made out of flour with a lot of sugar and other stuff, it's going to spike your insulin levels because of just the way it's made. So if you spike insulin levels, and insulin is a growth factor, well, that's going to, anything that promotes growth is going to be pro-cancer as well. So therefore, you want to avoid some of these things such as the sugar, the refined grains. And that's just based on sort of knowledge, because if you can prevent obesity, and we know that if you eat a lot of sort of white bread and sugar, you're more likely to gain weight. I mean, that's sort of, most people have acknowledged that. And the other thing that's very interesting is this sort of ancient practice of fasting, because again, here's a practice which has been around for thousands of years. And what it does, of course, is it lowers all your sort of growth factors, because when you don't eat, your nutrient sensors, which is insulin, and also this molecule called mTOR, they're going to go down because you're not eating anything. So no nutrients are coming in, which sends the signal to the body that do not grow, because your body doesn't want to grow if there's no nutrients coming in. If you are sending this message to the body that says do not grow, that is going to be a soil that is not conducive to the growth of cancerous cells. And cancer grows faster than anything else. So the point is that you can actually do these things, such as eating sort of unrefined foods, fasting, and these are the same things that you see in a lot of traditional societies, as well as a lot of the societies that are, have low rates of cancer, like the sort of 1980s China and 1980s Japan and so on, where they're eating a lot less of things, but they're also incorporating these ideas of fasting. Like they're not like, people don't think you're crazy. Like it's just part of what you do over there. And people here used to talk about it too, like it's a cleanse, it's a detox. So it's not that, we have it all wrong, because we have this idea that we want to take something to prevent cancer, when in fact you need to eliminate something to prevent cancer. And that's the more effective way to go. And it doesn't cost you any money, because of course you don't have to buy whatever supplement they're selling. It's actually free. So these ideas of eating unrefined foods, cutting down the sugars, and fasting are probably the most important things if you want to do something about your risk of cancer today. And if you are able to lose weight, if you are able to reverse that type 2 diabetes, we know that obesity and type 2 diabetes are going to increase your risk of obesity-related cancers. So if you move yourself away from there, by low-carb diets, by eating unrefined foods, by fasting, you're very likely going to lower your risk of cancer. I don't know that for sure because the studies aren't done, but the problem is the time scale of those studies, that would take like a 15, 20-year study to do. By that time, it's, you can't implement it because that's so much later. But you can implement it today, because those are all parts of what we've done traditionally. So I think those are great things to do to lower your own risk of cancer for these things. And it all comes back to not the sort of genetics of it, but the sort of environment, the sort of the soil part of things. That's what we need to focus on, because that's what we can do something about right now.
A lot of the principles of longevity is called hormesis. And the best description of that is Nietzsche's, "That which doesn't kill me makes me stronger." And so stressing cells actually basically makes the cell realize that, hey, times are really rough, makes an organism say, ooh, hard times are here. We've got to get through this, and we've got to look at every cell and say, are you pulling your weight? Do you look a little odd? Do you're... And it basically tells the cell to self-destruct or to eat itself. And these are signals that are started, among other ways, by fasting. So if there is a period of time that it doesn't look like you're going to get the next meal, you really take stock of everything that's going on and say, okay, you got to go. You're not pulling your own weight. You look really fit. You get to stay. And it's our own mechanism of self-pruning the dead wood, if you will. One of our big problems in our society is, in the good old days, we had built-in periods of fast because there were famines. There were periods of time, particularly in the winter, where there wasn't much food. And so we had a built-in circadian rhythm of a period of growth, like in the spring and summer, and then a period of what I call regression in the fall and winter. And that's when all the pruning was done. Well, now we have 365 days a year of growth. It's endless summer. We have access to food 24 hours a day, and that
25 hours a day.
Yeah, that's right. And some nutritionists have given people the unfortunate advice that the way to be healthy is to eat 6 small meals a day, or to snack between meals, or make sure you take a snack before you go to bed. And it's actually one of the worst things you can do. We, as humans, took over the world because we're actually the only fat ape. We have the ability to store fat. And you don't see a lot of fat chimps and gorillas. Now, gorillas look fat because of that giant gut. That's a fermentation vat. Yeah. But they're actually incredibly lean. Most great apes have 3% body fat. 3%.
How much you lift, bro? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyhow, We need to have periods of fasting to actually stimulate stem cells to grow. And the really cool thing about fasting is you get to call your bacterial herd in your gut. If they don't have anything to eat, particularly the bad guys are actually, they just leave. They don't have anything to eat. But here's the really cool thing about fasting. The guys who remain are these crazy guys, Akkermansia mucinophila, because they're living on the mucus. And the mucus is still there even if you're not eating. So they not only survive, but they become a bigger part of your gut flora. And the more you're stressed, the more they divide, the more mucus you make, and the more stem cells that you actually stimulate to grow just by fasting. Now everybody says, oh, geez, I have to eat. I have to eat. I can't fast. Well, my good friend, Dr. Walter Longo here at USC, who's the head of the Longevity Center at USC, has shown actually definitively in humans that a 5-day vegan calorie-restricted diet for 5 days of about 900 calories done once a month will have the exact same effect as if you calorie restricted for the entire month. And he calls it the calorie restriction mimicking diet. And it's part of my longevity paradox program. So the good news is, you don't have to do a water fast for 3 days. If you want to, it's great, but you can act as if you were fasting and achieve the same effect. More importantly, the longer you go in time period between meals, the better off you're going to be from a longevity standpoint, and particularly from your brain standpoint. And can we get into brainwash days by any chance?
Of course.
All right.
Of course.
So here's another really important thing. Through the years, I've become quite good friends with Dr. Dale Bredesen, who wrote The End of Alzheimer's. Probably, in my opinion, one of the 2 top neurologists in this country working on brain health. The other one's David Perlmutter, who I had on my podcast, the Dr. Gundry podcast, last week. So the deal is that we now know that the brain has to go through a wash cycle every night to get rid of toxins, debris, amyloid. Everybody knows about amyloid plaques in Alzheimer's. And that brain wash is done with what's called the glymphatic system. The brain actually shrinks normally about 20% to allow this wash of lymphatic fluid to clean out all this debris. Now that actually needs incredible blood flow. Now, you and I are from the Midwest. When I was growing up, after you ate lunch, my mother would not allow me to go swimming for 1 hour after we ate, because she knew that you would get cramps and die. And there was a bit of truth to that old wives' tale. Digestion needs a lot of blood flow. And after we eat, we send huge amounts of blood flow to our intestines for digestion. That means if I went out swimming, my muscles would not get enough blood flow and they'd get a cramp and I'd die. Well, it turns out the brain needs that blood flow to have a brain wash. So Dr. Bredesen has shown that you probably need 3, maybe 4 hours after your final meal of the day before you go to sleep, so that the blood isn't down in your intestines and can go up to your brain. Now you think about that with our lifestyle, and where unfortunately our biggest meal of the day is usually dinner. There's a great old saying that eat like a king at breakfast, a queen at lunch, and a pauper at dinner for longevity. And it's probably one of the best advice ever given. But we don't do that. And then we have a snack before we go to bed. And that's the worst possible thing for a brain clean, because sleep, deep sleep, is when we do this cleaning. And for most of us, and I track with an Oura ring, most of us deep sleep occurs very early in our sleep cycle. And so you're not going to get your brain cleaning if you've eaten a meal right before you go to bed. So I encourage people once a week to have a brain cleaning night and don't eat dinner. Or if you're going to eat dinner, really eat your last bite by about 5 o'clock in the evening. And do that once a week at the very least to clean your brain. Because everybody realizes we have this incredible epidemic of Alzheimer's, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Not only Alzheimer's, but Parkinson's and dementia. And if people just once a week take the step of having a brain cleaning night where they cut off their last meal. The other thing that Dr. Bredesen would tell you, and I'll tell you, is the longer you go between your last meal of today and the next meal, the better off you're going to be.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today.
When people try to intermittent fast, try to extend the length of time that they go without meals, about 80% of people fall flat on their face. And that's because we don't have what's called metabolic flexibility or mitochondrial flexibility.